The padlock gleamed in the pale August dawn like a brass taunt. Grace Hale knelt beside the wooden headgate that fed her father's irrigation ditch, her work-roughened hands trembling not from fear, yet but from the bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who hadn't slept more than 3 hours in as many nights. She traced the lock's heavy curve with one finger, then rocked back on her heels and looked across 200 acres of wheat that rustled in the dry Arizona breeze. The stalks stood heavy with grain golden and ripe and dying for lack of water. Without water for another week, the crop would shrivel. Without the crop, the bank would take everything. Grace was 26 years old, tall and lean from years of field labor, her dark hair already escaping the braids she'd tied before dawn. Her hands bore the permanent calluses of someone who'd been swinging scythes and hauling water buckets since she was tall enough to reach a pump handle. She wore a faded blue work dress that had been her mother's, once patched at the elbows and hem. Her gray eyes, her father's eyes, held the stubborn determination Robert Hale had always called pure foolishness, with equal parts exasperation and pride. She stood and walked deliberately to the tool she'd selected, the splitting axe, and returned to the headgate. The tool's weight felt right in her grip, familiar, purposeful. If they'd locked her out of her own water, she'd break the lock. Simple as that. Her father was dying in the house behind her, wasting away from something Dr. Pike couldn't quite name. And she'd be damned if she let Rupert Malloy steal their land while Robert Hale lay helpless. I wouldn't recommend that course of action, Miss Hale. The voice came from upstream, lazy with false friendliness. Grace spun axe still in hand and felt her stomach drop. 5 riders sat their horses in a loose semicircle against the brightening sky. She recognized the foremost man immediately. Copper Jim Talbot, foreman to Rupert Malloy, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties. Jim had earned his nickname from the reddish tint of his hair and beard, though some said it came from his complete lack of conscience, copper being the cheapest metal like his loyalty. He was grinning, and that grin made Grace's skin crawl. "Morning, Miss Hale." Jim called out, dangling something from his fingers, the key to the padlock. "Seems there's been a change in water allocation. Your daddy's debt came due yesterday. Malloy says the ditch feeds his cattle now, not defunct wheat farms." Grace tightened her grip on the axe handle. That ditch was built by community subscription in 1869. 14 families hold equal rights during growing season. You've got no legal standing. Got a court order says different. Jim patted his vest pocket at the brass buttons catching morning light. All nice and official. Water flows where the judge says it flows, and the judge says it flows to paying customers. He tilted his head, studying her. "Of course you could settle your daddy's note. Pay what's owed, and maybe we talk about water access again." "We don't owe anything. My father paid that loan in July. Bank ledger says otherwise. $300 outstanding plus interest. Due on delivery of harvest." Jim glanced theatrically at the wheat field, which don't appear to be happening anytime soon, what with no water and no crew to bring it in. Grace's mind raced. She'd seen her father count out the payment 2 months ago, relief washing over his weathered face as he'd handed the cash to Martin Voss at the bank. But if the bank was claiming otherwise, if they had papers that said different. She thought of her father 3 days ago, his voice thin as paper. "Something's wrong with the banknote, Gracie. The terms they're showing don't match what I signed. You need to." Then the coughing had taken him, that wet, rattling cough that made Grace want to scream. "You best drop that axe," Jim said, and his tone had shifted, still conversational, but with an edge that raised the hairs on Grace's neck. "Before somebody gets hurt." She looked at the axe in her hands, then at the 5 mounted men. The odds were absurd, but the lock was right there, and the wheat was dying, and her father was dying, and she was so tired of losing things. Grace raised the axe. The metallic click of a hammer being cocked cracked across the morning quiet. Jim's revolver pointed directly at her chest. "Last chance," he said. Grace's heart hammered. She could see Jim's finger on the trigger could calculate the distance between them, 30 feet, an easy shot. Her own pistol was in the house. The axe was useless at this range. But if she backed down now, they'd know she could be intimidated. She took one step toward the headgate. Jim fired. Someone grabbed Grace's wrist and yanked her down with shocking force. She hit the ground behind a bundle of shocked wheat just as the bullet cracked through the space where her head had been. The sound came a heartbeat later, a flat bang that echoed across the field. Grace's ears rang. She couldn't breathe. The fall had knocked the wind from her lungs. Above her, someone crouched with their back to the grain bundle, one hand still gripping her arm, hard enough to bruise. It was a man she'd never seen before. He wore buckskin breeches worn soft with age and a cotton shirt that had been cream-colored once. His hair was black and straight, bound back with leather. His face was angular, weathered with high cheekbones that marked him unmistakably as Apache. He was perhaps 35, lean and corded with muscle, and his dark eyes were fixed on Jim's position with absolute terrifying calm. Blood was seeping through a tear in his sleeve. "Stay low," he said in accented but perfectly clear English. From the ridges on either side of the wheat field, 4 more figures appeared rising from cover behind rocks and brush. They held rifles, and every weapon was trained on Jim and his men. Copper Jim's horse danced sideways. The other riders reached for their guns, but froze as they counted the barrels pointed at them. "What in blazes?" Jim started. "You should leave," the Apache beside Grace said quietly. "Take your men. Return to your employer. Tell him this land is protected now." "This ain't your concern, savage," Jim snarled. "Everything here concerns me now." The Apache's voice didn't rise. "The woman you just tried to kill is under my protection. Her enemies are my enemies. You understand?" A long silence stretched across the field. The wind stirred the wheat. Grace could hear her own heartbeat, feel the stranger's hand still gripping her wrist. Then Jim spat and jerked his horse around. "You're making a mistake. Malloy don't forget." "Neither do I," the Apache said. Jim and his men galloped toward the road, kicking up dust. The 4 riflemen held position until the riders were out of range, then lowered their weapons and began descending to the field. The man beside Grace released her wrist and shifted to examine his arm. The bullet had carved a shallow furrow through muscle, painful but not dangerous if cleaned properly. "You're bleeding," Grace managed. He glanced at the wound, as if noticing it for the first time. "I've had worse." His dark eyes moved to her face. "Are you hurt?" "No. You saved my life." "Yes," he agreed simply. Grace pushed herself to sitting, trying to gather her scattered wits. The 4 other Apache men were approaching, all lean and hard-looking, aged, somewhere between 30 and 45, wearing a mix of traditional and settler clothing. "I'm Takala," the man said. "Those men who burned our camp 3 days ago wore that foreman's brand on their horses. We tracked them here. Malloy's men attacked your camp." One of the others spoke, his voice rough with barely controlled rage. "Killed my wife. Killed Red Hawk's son. Killed Mato's brother. Set fire to our shelters, left tracks toward settler farms to make the cavalry think we were raiding." Understanding crashed over Grace. "He wants your land. Wants you driven onto the reservation so he can claim it." "He wants everything," Takala said. "Your land, our land, the water, all of it." He stood and offered his hand. "We need a place to watch, to wait. You need help defending your farm and bringing in your harvest. This serves both purposes." Grace took his hand and let him pull her up. Standing close, she could see the fine lines at his eyes, the jagged scar along his jaw. "The town will turn on me for harboring Apaches," Grace said. "The town has already turned on you, or they would not allow Malloy to steal from those who cannot defend themselves." Grace couldn't argue. She looked toward the house where her father lay dying, then at the wheat field, then at the 5 Apache warriors who just saved her life. Every instinct said this was dangerous. But Jim had just tried to kill her. Her father was dying. She had no crew, no water, and a deadline she couldn't meet alone. "How good are you with a scythe?" Grace asked. Takala's mouth quirked. "I will learn." From the house, a thin voice called, "Grace." What was that gunshot? Her father, trying to rise from bed, which would exhaust him. "I need to see to my father," Grace said. "But thank you for saving my life." "You owe nothing," Takala said. "But we accept your alliance. Our enemies are the same." Grace nodded and ran for the house, her legs shaking. Behind her, she heard the Apache men speaking in their own language, low, urgent tones. She understood the feeling. She was debating the same thing. But when she glanced back from the porch, Takala was watching her with steady, dark eyes, and something in his expression made her think that whatever came next, at least she wouldn't face it alone. Robert Hale had been a cavalry officer once Union Army 3rd Ohio mustered in at Camp Dennison in 1861. He'd survived Antietam and Gettysburg and a dozen smaller slaughters. He'd come west afterward because he couldn't stand cities full of widows and ghosts. Now he lay shrunken in the bed by the window, his hair pure white, his face collapsed into lines that made him look ancient. But his pale blue eyes still held their sharpness. "You're lying," he said as Grace tried to convince him the gunshot had been her scaring off coyotes. "Who was it, Jim?" Grace adjusted his pillows, buying time. "Jim came with a court order. Said the ditch belongs to Malloy now. They locked the head gate." Robert's jaw tightened. "Grace, listen. Something's wrong with that banknote. There's a clause about harvest delivery says if we don't bring in the wheat and deliver it to the mill by August 7th, the land forfeits automatically. That can't be right. You'd never sign that." "I didn't." He gripped her wrist. "I paid that loan, had the receipt, but it's gone from my desk. And when I tried to talk to Voss, he got nervous, started making excuses about my memory being faulty. I think they forged something." He coughed awful wet sounds. When it passed, his voice was weaker. "I was going to confront them yesterday, but I couldn't get out of bed." Ice formed in Grace's stomach. "If they're claiming we owe money, we don't, and they've locked us out of water. They're forcing a foreclosure while I'm too sick to fight." Robert's grip tightened. "But listen, this farm is yours. Your mother and I built it from nothing. I'll be damned if Malloy steals it because he's got a judge in his pocket. Dad, rest. I'll rest when I'm dead, which won't be long now." Matter of fact, like commenting on weather. "Dr. Pike says my heart's giving out. Could be days, could be 2 weeks. So listen while I can talk sense." Grace's vision blurred. She blinked hard. "There's a secondary document filed with the Territorial Land Office. I did it 2 years ago, right after your mother passed. It separates irrigation rights from the land deed. Even if the bank forecloses, those water rights transfer to you personally. Can't be seized for debt." He paused to breathe. "I did it to protect you. But if they've tampered with one document, they might have tampered with that too. That's a 3-day ride to the capital. Then you better leave soon. But first..." Another coughing fit. Grace held him until it passed. "First, you need to get that wheat in. Cut it, thresh it, get it to the mill by the 7th. If you can prove the farm is viable, it undercuts their case. Makes the forgery obvious. Grace thought of the locked headgate, the acres of grain, the impossible timeline. I can't do it alone. Then don't. There's 4 men who owe me, Oliver and his friends, the immigrants I sponsored. They'll help. And your Aunt Margaret has a spine like iron. Dr. Pike is fair. You're not as alone as you think. Grace wanted to tell him about Takala, but her father had fought wars, had complicated views on Indians. Then again, desperate times. There are men here, Grace said carefully. They helped me this morning when Jim tried to shoot me. They're Apache. Malloy's men attacked their camp, killed their families. They're tracking the ones responsible. She waited for anger. Instead, Robert studied her face. They saved you. Yes. And their enemy is Malloy. Yes. Then I'd be a hypocrite to object. The Apache have better cause to hate land grabbers than most. He sank into the pillows, exhausted. Be careful. The town won't understand. But you do what you need to do. Keep the farm. Bring in the harvest. His eyes drifted closed. Cut clean. Stook high. Keep the claim. I will, Dad. Within minutes, he was asleep. Grace sat watching his shallow breathing, trying to order her chaotic thoughts. August 1st today. Deadline was August 7th. 6 days to cut 200 acres, thresh it, bag it, haul it to Willow Springs. With no water, no crew, and every expectation Malloy would try to stop her. Impossible. Unless. Grace walked to the window. She could see the wheat field, and at its far edge, the 5 Apache men setting up camp near the creek, where cottonwoods provided shade. They moved with efficient economy, no wasted motion. Allies, Takala had called them. Our enemies are the same. It would have to be enough. By mid-morning, the situation had grown more complicated. Grace was breaking the padlock. With Takala's help, he'd produced a pry bar, and they'd levered the hasp free when more hoofbeats announced arrivals. A freight wagon pulled up. 4 men climbed down. Oliver Schmidt was 35, built like a draft horse, with hands the size of dinner plates. He'd emigrated from Bavaria 3 years ago, fleeing conscription, carrying nothing but determination. Grace's father had lent him money to file a homestead claim, had vouched for him when the land office questioned his papers. 3 more men, Silas Murphy from County Cork, red-haired and quick-tempered. Pierre Duchamp from Marseille, small and wiry. Fritz Bauer from Prussia, methodical and quiet. All immigrants, all sponsored by Robert Hale. Miss Grace, Oliver said, removing his hat. We heard in town about trouble, about Malloy making claims. We come to help with harvest. I can't pay you, Grace said. Your father gave us start when nobody else would. Silas said, his Irish accent thick. We don't forget that. Besides, Pierre added in his French accent, Malloy's been pushing on all us smallholders. You fight him, you fight for all of us, yes. Fritz simply began unloading tools, extra scythes, wooden cradles, rope, empty sacks. His vote cast through action. Grace felt something tight loosen in her chest. Thank you. Then Oliver's gaze drifted to where Takala stood near the creek. His expression shifted. Miss Grace, those are Apaches. Those are men who saved my life this morning when Jim tried to shoot me, Grace said firmly. They're staying. The immigrants exchanged uncertain glances. Grace understood frontier wisdom said you didn't trust Apaches. But frontier wisdom also said you didn't abandon neighbors. Your father would trust your judgment, Oliver said finally. So do we. But you should know, Silas added carefully, the town's already talking. Amos Church at the store is telling folks you're betraying the valley. People are scared. Let them be scared, Grace said. I've got wheat to harvest. Over the next hour, they organized. The scythes needed sharpening. Takala took that task. The old horse-powered threshing machine in the barn needed inspection. Fritz and Pierre volunteered. The wheat needed surveying. Juan and Mato went with Oliver. Grace found herself working beside Takala at the grinding wheel, testing blade edges. The rhythmic rasp of steel on stone was almost meditative. "Your friends are brave," Takala said quietly, "to work with us despite their fear. They're good men, as was your father to raise such a daughter." Takala held up a blade, examining its edge. "This one is ready." Grace took it. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, probably accidental, but it sent unexpected awareness through her sudden consciousness of his proximity, the warmth of his skin. She pulled back quickly. "You don't have to do this. You could hunt down the men who attacked your camp and be gone. This harvest isn't your burden." Takala was quiet for a moment, the wheel spinning. "When I was young, my father told me, a man who only avenges his own wrongs is small. A man who fights for justice beyond himself is a warrior. Malloy's men killed my cousin, my nephew, my friend's wife. But they will not stop there. They will kill again until someone stops them." He looked at her. "You are trying to stop them. That makes your fight my fight." Grace didn't know what to say. In her experience, people fought for their own interests. Alliances were transactional. But Takala spoke like he meant it, like justice mattered more than revenge. "Thank you," she said quietly. By afternoon, they'd begun cutting. Grace demonstrated the cradle scythe technique, the long curved blade with its wooden frame that caught cut stalks. It required rhythm: swing low, step forward, swing low, step forward. Takala watched carefully, then attempted to replicate her motion. His first swing went too high, his second too low, catching dirt. "Here," Grace said, moving behind him. "Lower. Let the weight do the work." She reached around to adjust his grip, her hands covering his on the handles. It put them uncomfortably close, her front against his back, her chin at his shoulder. She could feel the tension in his muscles. "Like this," she said, guiding him through the motion. "Smooth, steady, find the rhythm." They made 3 swings together. Then Grace became acutely aware of how this must look and stepped back quickly. "Try it alone now," she said. Takala swung again, better this time. The wheat fell in a satisfying swath. "Good," Grace managed. She moved away to check the others, conscious of warmth lingering on her palms. It meant nothing. Just necessity. Just teaching. But her heart was beating faster than exertion warranted. By evening, they'd cut perhaps 2 acres, pathetically little, but a start. They shocked the wheat into bundles and tied them with twine. As the sun set, Grace stood looking at their accomplishment. It felt like too much and not nearly enough. "We'll get faster," Oliver said, "once we find our rhythm." "I hope so." "Grace?" Oliver's voice dropped. "That Apache man Takala, he watches you." Grace felt heat in her cheeks. "He's watching everyone, making sure we're safe." "Maybe." Oliver didn't sound convinced. "Just be careful. People won't understand, and after this is over, you still have to live here." Grace wanted to snap that she didn't care, but Oliver was right. She did have to live here. "I know," she said quietly. That night, as Grace sat with her sleeping father, she heard a soft knock. Takala stood in the doorway. "Your arm," Grace said, remembering the bullet graze. "Did you clean it?" "I forgot." "Of course you did. Come in." By lamplight, Grace cleaned the wound with boiled water and soap, her touch gentle. Takala sat perfectly still. "You've done this before," he observed. "My mother taught me. Said a frontier woman needs doctoring, same as cooking." Grace began wrapping bandage. "My father got hurt plenty. farming accidents. Takala's hand closed over hers on the knot. You tied it too loose. It will slip. His fingers adjusted the bandage, then guided hers through tying a better knot. Their hands overlapped when he finished. Tie it to withstand the pull, he said quietly. Or it comes loose when you need it most. Grace's breath had gone shallow. She was acutely aware of his proximity, of being alone with him, her father asleep in the next room. I should, she started. Yes, he agreed, but neither moved. Then from outside, one of his kinsmen called something in Apache. The spell broke. Takala stood. Thank you, he said, for the bandaging. You're welcome, for the rescue. He nodded and moved to the door, then paused. Grace, be careful. Malloy will escalate. He left. Grace stood in the kitchen, hands still tingling, trying to process the tangled mess of her emotions. Fear for her father, anxiety about the harvest, gratitude toward Takala, and underneath it all, something else. Something warm and unsettling she had no business feeling toward a man she'd met only hours ago. A man whose people and hers had been at war for generations. Grace extinguished the lamp and went to sit with her father, trying not to think about any of it. They came for the water at midnight on August 2nd. Grace woke to hoofbeats. She grabbed her revolver and ran to the window in time to see riders at the headgate. They were jamming something into the mechanism. She fired through the window, not aiming, just raising alarm. The glass exploded. The riders scattered. By the time Grace reached the headgate, Takala and his kinsmen were there, rifles ready. But damage was done. The gate had been jammed with steel spikes driven deep into wood. Upstream, someone had rolled rocks into the channel, creating a dam. The water had stopped. Blast it! Grace hissed. The spikes were driven too deep to pull. We moved the rocks, Takala said. Now. He was already wading into the creek, waist deep and snow-melt cold. Awan joined him. Grace grabbed a lantern and brought it to the bank. They heaved rocks from the channel stones, thudding onto the bank. A shot cracked from the ridge. The lantern exploded. Darkness slammed down. Down. Takala grabbed Grace and pulled her under the water. They crouched in the creek bed, the current pushing. Grace's lungs started burning. Another shot whipped through the water. Takala's arm was around her waist, holding her down, keeping her safe. Grace could feel his heart beating against her shoulder blade, fast but steady. The shooting stopped. They surfaced slowly, gasping. Keep working, Takala said. No more light. In darkness, Grace bent and lifted stones she could barely see. Twice she slipped. Twice Takala steadied her hands at her waist. After what felt like hours, they dislodged enough rocks that water began trickling through. Then flowing. Then rushing as the dam collapsed. They scrambled to the bank, all three shaking with cold. Awan headed for camp to change. Takala stayed watching Grace with concern. You need dry clothes, he said, before the cold takes hold. I'm fine, Grace managed through chattering teeth. You are freezing. Go. Grace stumbled to the house, shed soaked clothes, dressed in dry ones. When she emerged wrapped in a blanket, she found Takala on the porch. He changed into dry buckskin. Water still dripped from his hair. The gate is flowing, he reported, but those spikes are a problem. Thank you, Grace said, for pulling me down. You would have done the same, Takala said simply. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Grace poured coffee and brought 2 cups to the porch. This will get worse, Takala said. Malloy knows we are here now. Next time they will come to kill. I know. You could walk away. Sell to Malloy, leave. Grace looked at him. Would you? No. Then you understand why I won't. Takala smiled, rare expression that transformed his face. I do. They finished their coffee. The stars wheeled overhead. When Grace stood to check her father, she felt Takala's hand brush hers just a moment, but deliberate. Sleep, he said. We will watch. Grace nodded and went inside, climbed into bed, and fell into exhausted sleep. The next morning, Grace rode to Willow Springs to investigate the bank records. She needed proof of the original loan terms. The town squatted in a shallow valley. 24 buildings lined a dusty street bank store, hotel, saloon, sheriff's office, Dr. Pike's surgery, and the schoolhouse where Grace's Aunt Margaret taught. Grace tied her horse outside the bank and went in. Martin Voss, the banker, looked up with the expression of someone who discovered something unpleasant. Miss Hale, he said without warmth. I need to see the original loan documents my father signed. Voss's mouth tightened. Those are bank property, not available. They concern my family's land. I have every right. You have no rights until the debt is settled. Now excuse me. A door opened behind the desk. Rupert Malloy emerged, and Grace understood why Voss was stonewalling. Malloy owned the bank. At 52, Rupert Malloy looked like prosperity, expensive suit, gold watch chain, pomaded hair. But his eyes held all the warmth of a snake. Miss Hale, he said with false courtesy. I'm sorry about your father's difficulties. But business is business. The note is clear: harvest delivery by August 7th, or the land reverts to satisfied debt. My father says he never signed that clause. Malloy's expression didn't change. Perhaps his memory is failing along with his health. Sad, but common. Rage flared in Grace's chest. Don't you dare. I dare suggest you accept my offer. I'll buy your wheat at fair price, settle the debt, lease the land back to you. Your father can die in peace. Or you can fight, lose everything, and end up with nothing but bitterness. I'll take the bitterness, Grace said. She turned and walked out. On the street, she nearly collided with Margaret Hale, her father's younger sister, unmarried and formidable. Grace, Margaret said, taking in her expression. What happened? Grace explained. Margaret's mouth thinned. That snake. Robert was sharp when he signed that note. I was there. He'd never agree to such terms. She shifted her books. Come to the schoolhouse. In the schoolhouse, Margaret rummaged in her desk and produced a small leather journal. Your father asked me to witness the loan signing. I took notes, habit from teaching. She flipped pages. Here, July 18th, 1876. Robert Hale Mortgage Farm for $300 at 8% interest payment due at harvest for 3 years. 3 years, Grace. Not payment due immediately or delivery required by specific date. Just standard terms. Would that hold up legally? I don't know. But it's contemporary documentation from a credible witness. Margaret pressed the journal into Grace's hands. Take it. Use it. And Grace, be careful. People are talking about you and those Apache men. Some are saying worse than just talking. Grace tucked the journal away. Let them talk. She stopped at the general store for supplies. Amos Church, the storekeeper, barely acknowledged her. I need 10 pounds of flour and 5 of salt, Grace said. Church didn't move. Can't sell to you. What? Can't sell to you no more, Miss Hale. Not with you harboring savages. I got a family to think about. Grace felt blood drain from her face. Those men saved my life. Don't matter. You're bringing trouble on the whole valley. You want supplies, get them elsewhere. There is nowhere else within 30 miles. Then I guess you got a problem. Grace stood frozen, humiliation warring with anger. She wanted to leap over the counter and throttle him, but that would only fuel gossip. She turned and left. Outside, she found Takala waiting. He'd followed her to town, staying back until needed. The storekeeper refused service. Grace said, her voice shaking. Because of you. Takala's expression didn't change. We can ride to Prairie Rose, 10 miles east. They may be willing to trade. That's 2 hours there and back. We don't have time. Then we make time. His voice was calm. Or we do without. But Grace, this is only the beginning. The town will turn on you more before this ends. I don't care. You say that now. But when you need their help and they refuse, you will care. Grace wanted to argue. But he was right. They rode to Prairie Rose, a smaller settlement. The harness maker there had flour and salt, though he charged twice the fair price. Grace paid without argument. They had no time for negotiation. On the ride back, they were a mile from home when riders appeared ahead. 6 men spread across the road. Copper Jim at center. End of the road, Jim announced. Boss says you've caused enough trouble. Grace's hand dropped to her revolver. Takala's rifle came up smoothly. We don't want trouble, Grace said. Let us pass. Can't do that. You're squatting Miss Hale. Squatters need removing. The foreclosure is fraudulent. The loan was paid. Not what the ledger says. Jim's hand rested on his pistol. Now you can turn back, leave the territory, and we'll call it settled. Or you can try getting past us and we'll settle it the hard way. Grace's mind raced. 6 against 2. Terrible odds. But if she turned back, she'd miss the deadline. I suggest we go through them, she said quietly to Takala. We're smaller targets, faster horses. That is suicide. It's suicide to surrender. Takala scanned the terrain. There is a ravine south, 40 yards. If we reach it, we have cover. That's 40 yards of being shot at. Better than standing here to be shot. He glanced at her. On my signal, ride hard and low. Grace wanted to argue, but Jim was reaching for his gun. Now, Takala fired 3 shots at Jim's position, not to kill, but to create chaos. Grace and Takala spurred their horses and ran. Gunfire exploded. Grace crouched low, hearing bullets crack past. Her mount surged beneath her. The ravine loomed 30 yards, 20-10. They hit the edge and slid down in a cascade of dirt, landing hard at the bottom. You hit, Grace gasped. No. Behind them, Jim and his men gave chase, but eventually fell back, apparently unwilling to pursue onto Grace's land, where Takala's kinsmen waited. They reached the farm to find everyone on alert. Once danger passed, they began work again. But the incident left Grace shaken. Malloy wasn't just attacking with legal maneuvers. He was willing to kill. The next 3 days blurred into brutal routine. Cut wheat dawn to dusk. Thresh what they'd cut using the temperamental gin. Bag the grain. Stack it. Repeat. Grace lost track of time, lost weight. Her hands bled. She didn't care. They were making progress, slow, painful, but progress. 50 acres cut by evening of August 3rd. 70 by evening of the 4th. Then the belt on the horse-powered threshing machine snapped. Fritz discovered it on August 5th, swearing in German. It's worn through. We need replacement. Where do we get one? Grace asked, dread settling. The mill might have one, or we order from Tucson, which takes a week. Fritz's expression was grim. Without this belt, we cannot thresh. Without threshing, we cannot deliver. Grace wanted to scream. Instead, she forced herself to think. Can we make a temporary fix? Fritz considered. Maybe. If I had materials, heavy canvas, hide strips, wire for tensioning. They raided everything. Pierre contributed his spare shirt. Grace sacrificed a tarp. Awan provided saddle leather. Fritz spent the afternoon constructing a makeshift belt. By evening, he'd produced something that looked like it might hold. Maybe. "We test tomorrow," Fritz announced. "And pray." That night, Grace sat with her father, who was noticeably weaker. His breathing had a wet, rattling quality. "How's the harvest?" Robert asked, voice barely audible. "We'll make the deadline, I promise." "Good girl." His hand found hers. "Grace, listen. If I don't make it, don't. Hush. In my desk, third drawer, there's an envelope marked, 'For Grace.' Letters I've been writing. Things I wanted to tell you." He paused to breathe. "Your mother and I were proud. Always. Don't forget." Grace's vision blurred. "I won't. And that Apache man, Takala. He's good, I can tell. Don't let the town's prejudice blind you to that." "I won't." "Good." Robert's eyes drifted closed. "Now let me rest." Grace sat with him until he slept and then went outside. She found Takala by the creek cleaning his rifle by moonlight. "Your father?" he asked. "Dying. Days, maybe hours." Grace sat beside him on their log. "I'm going to lose him, and there's nothing I can do. Death is always like that. We watch unable to intervene." Takala set the rifle aside. "When my father died, I was 3 days' travel away. Never said goodbye. Never told him I loved him, was honored to be his son." Grace's throat ached. I'm sure he knew. Perhaps. But words matter. He looked at her. "Tell your father what you need to say while you still can. Don't let it remain unspoken." Grace nodded, unable to speak. They sat in silence. Finally, Takala said quietly, "When this is over, when harvest is delivered, my kinsman and I will leave." Something cold stabbed Grace's chest. "Of course. You have your own lives." "Yes, but—" He hesitated. "I do not want to leave." Grace's breath caught. "Takala, let me finish. I cannot stay permanently. My people need me. Red Hawk's daughter waits for news. Mato must tell his brother's widow what happened. We have obligations." He turned to face her. "But when those obligations are met, I would like to return, if you would allow it." "Return as what?" "As a man who wants to build something with a woman he respects." Takala's voice was steady, but his eyes held uncertainty. "I know what it would mean. Know the town would never accept it. Know the risks. But Grace, I have seen you fight with courage that puts warriors to shame. You honor your father. You protect your allies. You stand for what is right." He paused. "You are someone worth standing beside, if you will have me." Grace's heart hammered. This was impossible, a romance between white woman and Apache warrior. The town would exile her. Her life would become infinitely harder. But when she looked at Takala, at his steady gaze, his quiet strength, the way he'd thrown himself between her and danger, she couldn't bring herself to care. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Yes, I'll have you. When you come back, yes." Relief broke through Takala's calm. He reached out and cupped her face with one hand thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I will come back," he said. "This I promise." Grace turned her head and kissed his palm, brief, deliberate. They sat together until moon was high, hands clasped, planning a future that might never come, but felt worth fighting for. The belt held for 3 hours. They started threshing at dawn on August 5th, feeding wheat into the gin, while horses walked their circular path. Fritz monitored with intensity, adjusting tension constantly. Then, with a sound like a gunshot, it snapped. Tarnation. Fritz stopped the horses before damage occurred. He examined the brake. The stitching failed. We need proper materials. They worked through the day and night, processing what they could by hand. By dawn of August 6th, they'd threshed enough grain to meet minimum delivery requirements. Barely. They loaded wagons as the sun climbed. Storm clouds were massing west, a monsoon rolling in. If rain came before they reached town, the roads would turn to mud. They had to leave now. Grace checked on her father one last time. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow. "We're delivering the wheat, Dad," she said. "We did it." Robert's eyes opened slightly. His lips moved. Grace leaned close. "Proud of you. Don't leave me yet, please." "Can't." A long breath. "Grace, the head gate. Go check. The head gate." "Dad, that doesn't matter. Go." With last strength, he squeezed her hand. "Check it, please." Grace looked at Dr. Pike, who'd arrived earlier. He nodded gravely. "Humor him. I'll stay." So Grace ran to the head gate. Takala followed. Dawn light was growing, painting stubble gold. Water was flowing. "I don't understand," Grace said. "What did he want me to see?" Then she noticed something caught on one of the steel spikes Jim's men had driven in days ago. She pulled it free. A scrap of vest fabric, brown wool with distinctive stamped brass buttons. Copper Jim's vest. She'd recognize those buttons anywhere. "This is from the day my father died," Grace said slowly, pieces coming together. "August 1st? He said he was going to confront them at the head gate. Dad must have come out here, found Jim tampering, challenged him. And Jim struck him." Takala finished. "Your father's weak heart could not withstand violence. He died here or nearby." Grace stared at the fabric, cold certainty settling over her. Her father had been murdered. Maybe not outright killed, but attacked, triggered into fatal heart attack. She should feel devastated. Instead, she felt clarifying rage, pure and cold and sharp. "We deliver this wheat," Grace said, "and then we make sure everyone knows what Malloy did." They returned to find Dr. Pike waiting on the porch, his expression telling everything. "I'm sorry, Grace. He's gone." Grace walked inside to her father's room. Robert Hale lay still, face finally peaceful. She sat beside him and took his cold hand. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," she whispered. "But I promise I'll finish this. I'll get the wheat delivered, prove the farm is viable, expose what Malloy did. I swear it." She sat for an hour. Then Margaret touched her shoulder. "We need to prepare him, and you need to make that delivery." Grace kissed her father's forehead, then stood and walked out. The wagons were loaded. Sun was climbing. They had until sunset. "Let's finish this," Grace said. They rolled out at mid-morning, 2 wagons loaded with grain sacks, escorted by everyone who'd helped. Grace drove the lead wagon with Takala beside her. Oliver drove the second with Silas. Others rode as armed escort. They made it 5 miles before Malloy's men appeared. 15 riders spread across the road. Copper Jim at center, backed by hired guns. "Turn around," Jim called. "Last chance." "No," Grace said flatly. "Then you die here." Grace pulled out the vest fabric. "I found this at the head gate, from the day my father died. You were there, Jim. You attacked him. His heart gave out, and you left him." Jim's face went pale, then red. "That's a lie." "Then why is your vest fabric caught on the gate?" Grace's voice carried. "Why did he die the same day he planned to confront you about fraud? You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" Dr. Pike examined him. "Found bruising. We have my father's suspicions documented, and now physical evidence placing you at the scene." Grace held up the fabric. "Maybe not enough for murder, but enough to demand investigation. Enough to void foreclosure. Enough to ruin Malloy." Jim's hand dropped to his gun. "Doesn't matter if you're dead." Thunder cracked across the sky. Everyone looked up. Dark clouds were massing, lightning jagged between cloud and ground. Rain smell hit them. "We don't have time for this," Grace said loudly. "That storm's coming fast. If roads turn to mud before we reach town, none of this matters. So get out of our way, or we're going through you. Choose now." Jim hesitated. Then first raindrops fell and he cursed. "This ain't over," he snarled, wheeling aside. The wagons rolled through. They raced the storm to Willow Springs. Rain held off just enough to keep roads passable. Grace drove hard, pushing Horse's wagon, bouncing dangerously. Clouds opened 2 miles out. Rain came in sheets, instantly turning dust to mud. Wheels began bogging. Horses struggled. "Keep moving," Grace shouted over the storm's roar. Then Jim and his men attacked. They came from both sides, firing through rain. Grace heard bullets punching wagon boards. Takala returned fire methodically. A rider pulled alongside, reaching for the harness. Takala shot the horse to disable, not kill. It went down, throwing its rider. Through chaos and gunfire and driving rain, Grace kept horses moving forward. Willow Springs emerged from downpour buildings, blurred, but they're solid. They thundered down Main Street, scattering people. Grace hauled horses to a stop outside the mill. Standing on the covered weighing platform were Rupert Malloy and Sheriff Dodd. Malloy's face, when he saw the wagons, was almost worth everything. "You're too late," he said, recovering. "Deadline was noon. It's past that." "The deadline," Dr. Pike called, stepping from the crowd with a document, "is sundown delivery as specified in original agreement, which I have here properly filed. Would you like to dispute it, Mr. Malloy?" Malloy's eyes narrowed. "That agreement is voided by the harvest clause Robert signed." "Robert signed no such clause," Margaret said, pushing forward with her journal. "I witnessed the loan signing. I have contemporaneous notes. No delivery clause, no forfeit provision." She held it up. "Anyone can read it." "That's one woman's opinion." "It's documentary evidence from a credible witness," Pike interrupted. "Combined with the fact the supposed clause appears only in your bank copies and not territorial records, it establishes clear fraud." The crowd murmured. Grace saw doubt spreading. "Furthermore," Grace said, voice ringing clear, "Robert Hale died under suspicious circumstances August 1st, the same day he intended to confront your foreman about irregularities. Dr. Pike found bruising consistent with assault. We have this." She held up the vest fabric, found at the scene, matching Copper Jim's clothing. Malloy's face had gone ashen. "This is absurd. Robert died of natural causes. His heart failed after being attacked." Grace's voice broke. "He was killed to cover up your fraud." The crowd's murmur grew louder. Some nodded, others looked uncertain but listening. Then Copper Jim rode up, drenched and furious and beyond rational thought. He dismounted and stormed toward the platform. "This is your doing," he shouted at Malloy. "All of it, you said, intimidate him." "Shut up, Jim," Malloy hissed. But Jim was past caring. "You said make him scared, so I went to the gate, and when he started yelling about forged papers, I had to shut him up. I pushed him just to—" He stopped, realizing what he'd admitted. The silence was absolute. "You what, Jim?" Dr. Pike asked gently. Jim's face crumpled. "It was an accident. I pushed him. He fell, started clutching his chest. I didn't know his heart was bad. I didn't mean—" "You killed him," Grace said, voice like death. Jim lunged at her. Takala intercepted, catching Jim's arm and twisting. Jim went down in mud, crying out. Takala held him there, could have broken his arm, could have killed him. Then released and stepped back. "You want justice," Takala said to Grace, "not revenge." Sheriff Dodd moved forward with handcuffs, looking like a man whose comfortable corruption had collapsed. "Copper Jim, you're under arrest for manslaughter. Mr. Malloy, you're under arrest as accessory and for fraud." Malloy tried to run. Oliver's massive hand closed on his collar. The rancher went down. "That's enough running," Oliver said pleasantly. Dodd cuffed both men. Dr. Pike motioned toward the mill. "Now, if we could weigh this wheat and make delivery official." The mill operator began weighing. Bag by bag, Grace's wheat went onto scales. Rain continued, but the covered platform kept everything dry. 1,416 bushels, the operator announced. Sufficient to meet minimum delivery requirement. Delivered before sundown, August 7th, 1878. He signed his ledger with flourish. It was done. Grace stood dripping on the platform, watching the pen move across the page. They'd won. Despite every obstacle, despite violence and sabotage and her father's death, they'd won. She should feel triumphant. Instead, she just felt hollow. Takala appeared with a blanket. Someone had given it to him. He draped it around her shoulders. "Come," he said quietly. "The fighting is over." Grace let him guide her to the wagon. Margaret was there, and Pike, and all the others. "I need to go home," Grace said. "My father needs—" "I've arranged everything," Margaret said gently. "The undertaker will prepare him. Service is day after tomorrow. Grace, you don't have to do anything now, except rest." Grace nodded numbly. Takala drove her home through thinning rain sunset, breaking through clouds to paint everything gold. They buried Robert Hale 2 days later on a clear morning. The whole town turned out, even people who'd condemned Grace days before. Margaret read from Robert's Bible. Dr. Pike spoke about a man who'd served his country and raised a daughter who embodied his best qualities. Grace stood dry-eyed. She'd cried herself out. Now she just felt empty. As they shoveled dirt, Takala came to stand beside her. He said nothing, just stood close enough that his shoulder touched hers. After the burial, people came with food and condolences. Grace accepted both mechanically. Dr. Pike drew her aside. "I spoke with the territorial judge. Based on evidence, Margaret's notes, your father's letter, Jim's confession, they're voiding the foreclosure completely. The land is yours. Additionally, they're seizing Malloy's assets to pay restitution. There should be enough to compensate damages, replace equipment fund improvements." "That's good," Grace said distantly. "Your father would be proud." As evening approached and guests departed, Grace found herself alone. She walked through rooms filled with her father's presence, his coat, his boots, his spectacles. All the small things that added up to a life now ended. She was sitting on the porch when Takala emerged from the barn. "We leave tomorrow," he said. "Red Hawk needs to find his daughter. Mato must tell his brother's widow. We have delayed too long." Grace had known this was coming. "I understand." "I will return," Takala said. "Perhaps 6 weeks, perhaps 2 months. But I will return if you still want me to." "I want you to." He sat beside her. For a long time, they didn't speak. Finally, Grace said, "I keep thinking about all the things Dad won't see. Won't know." "He knew," Takala said. "In his final moments, he sent you to the headgate. He knew you would understand what you found, knew you would use it to win. He died knowing you would succeed because he trusted you." Grace thought about that, about her father's final words, "Check the headgate." A gift, the final evidence she'd need. "Thank you," she whispered. Takala pulled something from his belt, a carved bone bead intricately patterned. "Among my people, when a warrior chooses to build rather than wander, he marks that choice. This was my father's, given to me when he died." He pressed it into Grace's palm. I give it to you, not as promise of marriage, we are not ready, but as promise that I choose to build here, with you, when I return. Grace closed her fingers around the bead, warm, smooth. I don't have anything to give you. Yes, you do. Takala reached for the headgate key hanging from her belt. Let me be one who helps you manage the water. Let this be shared responsibility, shared future. Grace unhooked the key and placed it in his hand. Together. Together. Takala agreed. They sat until dark, planning a future that seemed impossible but worth fighting for. Takala and his kinsman left at dawn. Grace stood watching them ride north, morning sun painting their figures gold. They didn't look back. But Takala had gripped her hand before mounting, had held her gaze with intensity that needed no words. I will return, his eyes said. I will wait, hers replied. Then they were gone. The next 6 weeks passed in work. With restitution money, Grace hired Oliver and friends to repair fences, fix the barn, prepare for winter planting. Margaret came twice a week to make sure Grace was eating. Dr. Pike stopped by regularly with news Jim convicted of manslaughter, 10 years hard labor. Malloy, facing multiple fraud charges, would likely die in prison. Dodd resigned in disgrace. The town's attitude shifted slowly. Some remained hostile, but others thawed. The storekeeper made awkward overtures. People nodded greeting. Grace accepted it with wary neutrality. They'd been willing to abandon her. She wouldn't forget quickly. On a cool October morning, as Grace walked the fields planning winter planting, she saw riders approaching from the north. 5 of them. Her heart stuttered. She set down the surveying rope and walked toward the road, trying not to run. Takala reined up and dismounted. He looked thinner, more worn. But his eyes were clear, and when he saw Grace, his whole face transformed with relief. You came back, Grace said. I gave my word. They stood 5 feet apart. Proper decorum suggested they shake hands or nod acknowledgement. Grace closed the distance and hugged him. Takala went still with surprise, then his arms came around her, holding tight. Grace buried her face against his shoulder and felt something tight finally loosen. I wasn't sure, she admitted. I thought maybe you'd realize this was foolish. I realized no such thing. Takala pulled back to meet her eyes. I did everything I needed to do. He touched her face gently and thought about you every day, about this place, about building something that matters with someone who matters. The town won't make it easy. I don't require easy. I require worth the effort. You are worth the effort. Behind them, Awan coughed politely. We should perhaps move away from the road before gossips ride past. Grace laughed and stepped back. Come to the house, all of you. They spent the afternoon planning. Takala and his kinsman would camp on the property, build small cabins at the far end near the creek. In exchange for labor during planting and harvest, Grace would provide food supplies, water access. It was a business arrangement, except for the way Takala's hand found hers under the table when others weren't looking. Except for the way Grace felt something warm and right settle in her chest. This will work, Margaret said when she visited and heard the plan. It's not conventional, but it's sound. And Grace, I see how you look at him, how he looks at you. Be careful, but also be happy. Your father would want that. I'm trying, Grace said. As autumn deepened, Grace found rhythm. The farm had structure plans for planting repairs, completed fences mended. She was sleeping better, eating properly, remembering how to laugh. And every evening, Takala would find excuse to stop by, to discuss irrigation, to check a tool, to share coffee on the porch as sunset. They didn't talk about what they were becoming, didn't put words to the way their hands found each other or silences felt comfortable. It was too new, too fragile, too complicated. But it was there, growing, real. The first snow came in November, dusting empty fields. Grace stood on the porch, watching it fall, thinking about all the seasons to come, winters to survive, springs to plant summers, to tend autumns, to harvest. All the futures her father wouldn't see but had made possible. She heard hoofbeats. Dr. Pike rode up. "Morning, Grace. News." Territorial court reached final verdict on Malloy. Guilty on all counts. 15 years. Won't live to complete it, but he'll die in prison. Grace absorbed that. She'd expected satisfaction. Instead, just tired. Good. There's more. Court ordered full audit of Malloy's dealings. Turns out he's been running this scheme on dozens of landholders over a decade. They found evidence of at least 3 other suspicious deaths that might have been murder. 3. That they found, probably more. You weren't his first victim, but you might be the one that stopped him from creating more. After Pike left, Grace walked to her father's grave. The headstone was simple: Union Cavalry. Farmer. Father. "We won, Dad," Grace said. "Malloy's in prison. Farm is safe. Winter wheat is planted." She paused. "There's someone. Takala. I think you'd approve." Wind stirred bare trees. Grace stood a while, then walked back. She found Takala at the barn repairing harness. He looked up when she entered. "I went to my father's grave," Grace said. "Told him about us. And I think he'd be proud." She moved closer. "Someone who sees me as capable, who treats me as equal, who fights beside me." Takala set down the harness. "Grace, I love you," she said, the words escaping. Then, horrified, "I'm sorry. That was too fast." "I love you too." Takala interrupted. "I have since the day you stood at the headgate prepared to fight 6 armed men with an axe. Certainly by the time you trusted me despite every voice saying I was the enemy." Grace's breath caught. "Takala, let me finish." He closed the distance. "I know the difficulties. Know the town will judge. Know my people may question. Know we may face legal obstacles. But Grace, I have been alone a long time. And then I found you. Found someone worth standing beside. Worth building with. Worth loving." He cupped her face with both hands. "So yes, I love you. And if you will have me not today, not tomorrow, but someday, when time is right, I would like to make this permanent. Build this life together. Officially and eternally." Grace felt tears streaming. "Yes. Yes, I'll have you. Whenever the time comes. Yes." Takala kissed her, then gentle and deep and full of promise. Grace kissed him back, hands in his hair, heart hammering. When they broke apart, Takala rested his forehead against hers. "We will face difficulties," he said. "We will. We will be judged. We will. It will not be easy." "No," Grace agreed. "But the worthwhile things never are." Spring came early in 1879. The wheat returned in green shoots that turned the field emerald. Grace worked beside Takala and his kinsmen tending the crop. The Apache men had built their cabins. They came and went as they pleased, helping when needed, hunting when not. The arrangement worked well. The town had adjusted slowly. Dr. Pike ran a clean operation as sheriff. Margaret still taught and defended Grace fiercely. Oliver and the immigrants had prospered, worked alongside Grace and Takala without discomfort. Some remained hostile. Mrs. Vanderburg organized a petition to remove undesirable elements. 7 people signed. The territorial government ignored it. Grace didn't care. She had work that mattered, land that was hers, and someone who loved her. On a warm May afternoon, as they checked wheat for blight, Takala said suddenly, "Marry me." Grace looked up. What? Marry me? Today? Tomorrow? Next week? Whenever you're ready. Takala, we talked about taking time. I'm sure. He moved closer. Grace, I have been sure since I saw you prepared to break that gate rather than surrender. I have been waiting because I thought you needed time. But I don't need more time. I need you. Permanently. Officially. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Grace's heart raced. The town will gossip regardless. Let them. It might not be legal. Then we'll fight those laws, or ignore them, or find someone willing to marry us who doesn't care. Takala took her hands. Grace, we have faced land grabbers, murderers, corrupt banks, town prejudice. We have survived violence and sabotage and impossible odds. Do you think paperwork will stop us? Grace started laughing. When you put it that way. So will you? Yes, Grace said. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes. Takala pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly there in the wheat field in daylight, where anyone could see. Grace kissed him back and decided she didn't care who saw. They married 3 weeks later in a ceremony that scandalized half the territory and delighted the other half. Justice of the Peace Miller officiated. Dr. Pike signed as witness. Margaret stood as witness. Oliver and friends attended with families. Takala's kinsmen performed traditional blessings. Mrs. Vanderberg and her faction stayed away, which everyone agreed improved the atmosphere. Grace wore her mother's dress altered to fit. Takala wore finest buckskin with the turquoise pendant his father had worn. They spoke vows in English and Apache, promising to stand together, build together, fight together. When Pike pronounced them married, the small crowd cheered. Takala kissed his wife with enthusiasm that made Margaret blush and Oliver whistle. Welcome to the family, Margaret said, hugging Takala. Take care of her. Always, Takala promised. That night, as they lay together in the house Grace had grown up in, surrounded by sounds of spring and promise of harvest to come, Grace thought about everything that had brought them here. The violence and loss. The struggle and pain. Her father's death and the fight to honor his legacy. All the hard things that had forged something strong and real and worth keeping. What are you thinking? Takala asked, fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. That my father would have liked you, Grace said. That he'd be happy I found someone who fights beside me instead of trying to protect me from everything. You are the strongest person I know, Takala said. Your father raised you well. He did. Grace turned to face him. So now what? We just live. We just live. Plant wheat, raise cattle, maybe children someday. Build something that lasts. Takala smiled. It's not as dramatic as fighting corrupt ranchers, but it's important work. The most important work, Grace agreed. Outside wheat rustled in night breeze, heavy with promise. Inside, two people who'd found each other through fire and blood and impossible odds, held each other and planned futures neither had imagined possible. Come morning, they'd begin the endless work of building a life together. They'd face prejudice and difficulty and obstacles they couldn't predict. But they'd face it together, equal partners in survival and love, and stubborn refusal to surrender. Just like Grace's father had taught her. Cut clean, stook high, keep the claim. They'd keep it together. Whatever came. And that was more than enough.